Welcome to another bone-chilling episode of horror stories that will make your skin crawl with fear and unease. Today, we'll be delving into another Papa Dudut horror story that has been making rounds on TikTok, leaving viewers sleepless for days. This particular tale has garnered millions of views and thousands of comments from terrified users who claim to have experienced similar encounters. As we venture into the shadows of this narrative, prepare yourself for a journey that might leave you questioning the safety of your own home and the reality of what lurks in the darkness. The first few weeks in their new home passed without incident, with the family settling into a comfortable routine as they explored their surroundings and met their neighbors. The twins had started at their new school and were making friends quickly, bringing home stories of their adventures and achievements each day. Sarah had joined the local book club, and Michael had found a group of fellow cycling enthusiasts to ride with on weekends. Everything seemed to be falling perfectly into place, and the Morales family couldn't have been happier with their decision to move to Pinecrest. It wasn't until the third week that Sarah began noticing small, inexplicable changes around the house. Items were not where she had left them. Doors she was certain she had closed were found open, and occasionally, she would catch a whiff of an unfamiliar scent that reminded her of damp earth and old books. At first, she attributed these occurrences to the natural adjustment period of living in a new space, or to the twins playing pranks, or even to her own forgetfulness as she juggled the responsibilities of managing their new home. Michael suggested that perhaps the house was settling, as older homes often do, and that there was nothing to worry about. One evening, while Michael was working late and the twins were doing their homework in their rooms, Sarah was preparing dinner in the kitchen when she heard a distinct tapping sound coming from the basement. The rhythmic noise echoed through the floorboards, almost like someone was trying to send a message in code. Setting down her knife, she listened intently as the tapping continued, growing slightly louder with each passing moment. Her heart raced as she debated whether to investigate the sound or ignore it, the rational part of her mind insisting that it was probably just the water pipes or the heating system making normal house noises. But something deeper, a primal instinct perhaps, warned her that there was more to these sounds than mechanical explanations could provide. Sarah stood frozen in the kitchen, her hands gripping the edge of the countertop as the tapping from the basement grew more insistent. With each passing second, the sound became more deliberate, as if whatever was causing it knew she was listening. Taking a deep breath to steady her nerves, she called out to the twins, who appeared at the top of the stairs, curious about their mother's strained voice. Sarah asked if they had been playing in the basement earlier, but both Emma and Ethan shook their heads, looking confused by the question. "Mom, you told us not to go down there until Dad finished setting up the game room," Emma reminded her, while Ethan nodded in agreement. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine as she realized that indeed, the basement door had been kept locked since they moved in, with Michael planning to renovate the space on weekends. The key to the basement had been hanging on a hook by the kitchen door, but when Sarah turned to look, she discovered with mounting horror that it was missing. That night, after Michael returned home, Sarah shared her concerns about the strange occurrences in the house. Michael listened patiently, his forehead creasing with worry, not at the events themselves, but at how they were affecting his wife. He suggested that perhaps the stress of moving and settling into a new community was taking its toll on her. Nevertheless, he agreed to check the basement and the rest of the house to put her mind at ease. The basement inspection revealed nothing unusual, just boxes they hadn't unpacked yet and old furniture left by the previous owners. Michael found the missing key behind the refrigerator, suggesting it had fallen there accidentally. Over the next few days, Sarah tried to dismiss her fears as imagination, focusing instead on making their new house feel more like home. She hung family photos on the walls, arranged their books on shelves, and planted flowers in the garden while the twins played in the yard. Yet the feeling of being watched persisted, especially when she was alone in certain parts of the house. The basement door, which Michael had assured her was securely locked, would sometimes be found slightly ajar, a sliver of darkness peeking through the gap. One afternoon, while the twins were at school and Michael was at work, Sarah was folding laundry in the master bedroom when she heard what sounded like children's laughter coming from downstairs. Thinking perhaps the twins had returned early from school, she called out their names but received no response. As she descended the stairs, the laughter grew fainter, seeming to drift toward the basement door, which once again stood open despite having been locked earlier that morning. Sarah approached cautiously, her heart pounding in her chest as she reached for the light switch beside the door. The basement light flickered weakly, casting elongated shadows across the concrete floor and partially illuminating the space below. Sarah stood at the top of the stairs, gripping the handrail with white knuckles as she peered into the dimness. The laughter had stopped the moment she flipped the switch, replaced by an eerie silence that seemed to press against her eardrum. Taking a tentative step down, she called out again, her voice echoing in the enclosed space. "Hello, is someone there?" No response came, but as Sarah descended further into the basement, she noticed something that hadn't been there during Michael's inspection. In the far corner, partially hidden behind some boxes, stood an old wooden trunk with intricate carvings along its edges. She was certain it hadn't been there before, or at least, neither she nor Michael had mentioned seeing it. Drawing closer, Sarah could make out symbols etched into the wood. Strange markings that resembled no language she recognized, but somehow gave her a sense of profound unease. Against her better judgment, driven by a curiosity she couldn't explain, Sarah knelt beside the trunk and ran her fingers over the carvings. They seemed to pulse beneath her touch, almost as if they were warm and alive. The lock on the trunk was an old brass mechanism, tarnished with age but intact. As she examined it, wondering where the key might be, Sarah suddenly realized that the basement had grown unnaturally cold. Her breath emerged in visible puffs, and goosebumps raised on her arms despite the warm spring day outside that evening. When Michael returned home, Sarah showed him the mysterious trunk. Unlike her, he didn't seem particularly concerned or interested, suggesting it probably belonged to the previous owners and had been overlooked during the move. When Sarah insisted that it hadn't been there before, Michael attributed her certainty to the chaos of moving and the fact that they hadn't spent much time in the basement yet. To appease her, he agreed to call the real estate agent the next day to ask about the trunk and whether the previous owners wanted it back. The call to the real estate agent only deepened the mystery, as she informed Michael that the house had been vacant for almost 2 years before they purchased it. The previous family had moved out hastily, leaving no forwarding address and abandoning most of their belongings, which had subsequently been cleared out by the bank before putting the house back on the market. When Michael described the trunk, the agent seemed confused, insisting that the house and basement had been completely emptied during the foreclosure process. Before ending the call, she hesitated, then added in a lowered voice that there had been rumors about the previous family, stories of strange behavior and the children speaking to people who weren't there. That night, a severe thunderstorm rolled in, battering the windows with rain and illuminating the house with flashes of lightning that cast ghostly shadows on the walls. The twins, frightened by the thunder, had crawled into bed with Sarah and Michael, who comforted them with stories and reassurances that the storm would soon pass. As they all finally drifted off to sleep, a particularly loud crash of thunder shook the house, jolting Sarah awake. In the brief, electric blue illumination that followed, she caught sight of a small figure standing at the foot of their bed. Her heart nearly stopped as she tried to make sense of what she had seen in that split second of light. It had appeared to be a child, but not one of her twins, who were still nestled safely between her and Michael. This figure had been smaller, with an oddly elongated head and limbs that seemed too thin to support even a child's frame. Before she could wake Michael, darkness reclaimed the room. And when the next lightning strike came, the space was empty, unable to fall back asleep. Sarah gently extracted herself from the bed and made her way downstairs, drawn inexplicably, the basement door. To her horror, she found it wide open, with a soft glow emanating from below, though she was certain no lights had been left on. As she descended the stairs, the wooden steps creaking beneath her weight, Sarah could hear what sounded like whispered conversations, multiple voices speaking in hurried, urgent tones. The mysterious trunk now sat in the center of the basement floor, and the glow she had seen from upstairs was coming from the seams of the trunk itself, light spilling out as if it contained something radiant. As Sarah approached the trunk, the whispering voices grew louder, more insistent, though she still couldn't make out what they were saying. The brass lock that had been intact earlier now lay broken on the floor beside the trunk, and the lid was slightly ajar. With trembling hands, Sarah reached out to lift the lid further, an overwhelming sense of dread washing over her, even as curiosity drove her forward. The moment her fingers touched the wood, the whispering stopped abruptly, replaced by a single child's voice that seemed to come from inside the trunk, saying clearly, "We've been waiting for someone like you for a very long time." Sarah stumbled backward, crying out in terror as the lid of the trunk flew open on its own, releasing a blinding light that filled the basement. From within that light emerged what looked like small, shadowy figures, child-sized but moving in a way that no human child would, their limbs bending at impossible angles as they climbed out of the trunk. Their faces were obscured by the light, but Sarah could feel their eyes on her, watching with an ancient hunger that transcended their childlike forms. She turned to run for the stairs, but found her path blocked by one of the shadow children, who tilted its head at an unnatural angle and spoke in a voice that seemed to bypass her ears and echoed directly in her mind. "You can't leave yet, Sarah. Papa Dudut wants to meet you." The name Papa Dudut reverberated through the basement, seeming to draw power from the very walls of the house. Sarah stood paralyzed as the shadow children formed a circle around her, their movements synchronized in a macabre dance. From the center of the trunk, a larger darkness began to coalesce, taking shape as something neither human nor entirely corporeal. It rose like smoke but moved with purpose, extending tendrils that resembled elongated fingers reaching toward Sarah. "Who's Papa Dudut?" Sarah managed to whisper, her voice barely audible over the pounding of her heart. The shadow nearest to her leaned in, its featureless face inches from hers as it replied in that same mind-penetrating voice. "Papa Dudut is the guardian of lost children, the keeper of forgotten souls. He collects those who are abandoned, those who are alone, and now he's interested in your children." A surge of maternal protectiveness cut through Sarah's fear, igniting a spark of defiance. "You stay away from my family," she snarled, backing toward the stairs while keeping her eyes on the encroaching darkness. The shadow children hissed in unison, a sound like air escaping from countless tiny punctures. The form rising from the trunk had nearly taken full shape now. A towering, rail-thin figure with limbs too long for its torso, and a head that seemed to constantly shift and blur. In that moment of absolute terror, Sarah remembered something her grandmother had once told her about entities that fed on fear. They could only maintain their hold on our world if given permission to enter. The basement, this house, was her home now, and these intruders had no right to be here. Drawing herself up to her full height, Sarah spoke with all the authority she could muster. "I don't know who or what you are, but you are not welcome in this home. This is my family's space, and I command you to leave." For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then, like a recording played in reverse, the shadow children began to retreat, sliding back toward the trunk with jerky, reluctant movements. The looming figure of Papa Dudut seemed to waver, its form becoming less distinct as Sarah's words took effect. But before it disappeared entirely back into the trunk, it leaned forward, and although it had no visible mouth, Sarah felt its final words brushed against her mind like cold fingers. "We were here long before you, and we will be here long after. This house remembers us, and one day your defenses will weaken. When that day comes, Papa Dudut will be waiting." With a sound like 1,000 distant screams, the trunk slammed shut, the force of it extinguishing the unearthly light and plunging the basement into darkness. Sarah fumbled for the light switch, her hand trembling so violently she could barely flip it on. When light flooded the room again, the trunk was gone, as if it had never existed. The basement was empty save for their boxers and old furniture, arranged exactly as it had been when they first moved in. The following morning, Sarah convinced Michael that they needed to have the house blessed, citing her religious upbringing as the reason, rather than telling him about her terrifying encounter. Though skeptical, Michael agreed, and they found a local priest willing to perform the ritual. As the priest moved through each room, sprinkling holy water and reciting prayers, Sarah felt a weight lifting from the house, a darkness receding. When they reached the basement, the priest paused, his expression growing serious as he closed his eyes in silent prayer for longer than he had in any other room. Afterward, he advised them to keep the basement door sealed with salt across the threshold, offering no explanation but giving Sarah a knowing look that confirmed her fears. Something had indeed been there. And while it was gone for now, such entities rarely surrendered their claims entirely. Years passed without incident, and the Morales family thrived in their home. The twins grew into teenagers. The basement was eventually renovated into a comfortable family room, and Sarah almost convinced herself that the encounter with Papa Dudut had been a vivid nightmare brought on by the stress of moving, almost because sometimes, on particularly stormy nights, she would wake to the sound of faint tapping coming from below, rhythmic and purposeful, like someone sending a message, waiting patiently for the day when they would be invited back in.